Hi everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. In today's video, we're diving into an emotional story about Diep, her past with her ex-husband Pao, and the powerful choice of forgiveness and moving forward. We'll see how James stands firmly by her side and how Pao finally learns to let go and wish them happiness. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. Diep struggles along a dusty road with a heavy basket of melons when she unexpectedly meets her ex-husband, Pao. Once a man who brought her pain, Pao now appears changed, sober, and filled with regret. He offers help and speaks of wanting to rebuild his life. But when he hints at wanting to reunite, Diep gently refuses. Later, James learns of the encounter and confronts Pao, reminding him of the suffering he caused Diep and firmly demanding he stay away. Pao accepts the truth, realizing Diep has found real happiness with James. In their final meeting, Pao thanks Diep for her forgiveness and tells James to cherish her always. With a genuine smile, he walks away, ready to start anew, while Diep and James embrace a future together, free from the shadows of the past. The red dirt road stretched endlessly beneath the blazing midday sun, every step raising a thin veil of dust that clung stubbornly to Diep's worn sandals. The heavy basket of melons pressed into her shoulder, pulling her slightly off balance. Yet her eyes carried a quiet determination, as though she wasn't just carrying fruit, but also her will to keep moving forward. A voice broke through the stillness, deep yet hesitant, a sound she hadn't expected to hear again. "Diep, is that you?" She froze, the basket swaying. Standing a few feet away was Pao, her ex-husband. His lean frame was backlit by the sun. His features softened, but his eyes alive with something she hadn't seen in years: regret. He stepped forward quickly, reaching out. "Here, let me take that. It looks heavy." Diep's grip tightened for a moment before she reluctantly let him help. The basket shifted into his hands, and suddenly, they were walking side by side, their footsteps crunching in rhythm against the gravel. Silence hung between them like a fragile thread until Pao finally spoke, his voice low. "I don't drink anymore. Been living alone, up on the hill. Just me and the quiet." Diep glanced at him, her expression calm but unreadable. He kept his eyes ahead, words trembling as they spilled out. "I'm sorry, Diep, for everything back then, for the nights, the shouting, the way I hurt you." Her lips curved into a faint, almost distant smile. "The past is behind us, Pao. What matters now is what you choose to do with your future." Her words were simple, yet they cut through the heaviness like sunlight piercing storm clouds. Pao lowered his head, his heart twisting with both shame and gratitude. For years, he had lived in the shadow of his mistakes. But standing next to Diep, hearing her voice free of bitterness, he felt for the first time that change was truly possible. The road stretched ahead, long and dusty, yet something within him lightened, as if Diep's forgiveness had loosened a weight far heavier than any melon basket. Later, they sat in a small cafe, shaded by the wide arms of an old tree. The wooden table was scarred with years of use, the glass of lemon tea between them catching bits of afternoon light. Pao's voice trembled as he spoke of the farm he wanted to start, of chickens and ducks, of a life grounded in simple, honest work. Diep listened, her gaze steady, her words gentle. You should do it, pal. Don't let fear hold you back. If you need help, capital, or even just guidance, I'll do what I can. His eyes stung. Moisture gathering though, he blinked it away. I don't deserve that kind of kindness. But thank you. I never dared to imagine a future before. Diep smiled softly, tilting her head. Then start imagining now. You should also think about finding someone new. Didn't you once mention a girl? Dieu, was it? The name seemed to surprise him, and his hands tightened around the glass. Dieu. She's been through a lot. I've thought of her, but what if I only bring her pain? Don't underestimate yourself, Diep said firmly. Life's too short. If your heart tells you she matters, then be brave. Soulmates don't come around often. For a moment, silence filled the cafe, broken only by the sound of leaves shifting in the breeze. Pao felt something stir within him, an ember reignited by her words. He raised the glass, the lemon tea cool on his lips, and realized the bitterness he'd carried all these years had begun to dissolve. Across from him, Diep's expression was calm, even hopeful, not just for her own journey, but for his as well. The market buzzed with life as the day drew to a close, its stalls glowing in the golden light of sunset. Vendors shouted, children darted through the crowd, and the air carried the scent of roasted corn and dust. Pao wheeled his bicycle beside Diep, the basket of melons balanced neatly at the back. Through the crowd, James appeared. His stride was steady, his eyes sharp as they fell on the two of them together. There was no anger, but a flicker of unease shadowed his calm expression. Pao? James's voice was low, edged with suspicion. What's going on here? Pao quickly shook his head, his tone urgent but honest. It's nothing. I just saw Diep struggling with the basket, so I offered to help. That's all. His gaze dropped, sincerity in every word. James, I only want her to be happy. I see that she is. With you. James's shoulders eased slightly, though he didn't let go of his caution. I understand. Thank you for helping her. Diep stood between them, her smile soft, bridging the space like sunlight breaking through clouds. It was just a chance meeting, James. Nothing more. The market noise seemed to quiet. The moment waited with unspoken history. James studied Pao, noting the change in his eyes. The man who once drowned himself in alcohol was gone. What remained was someone humbled, someone perhaps redeemed. Pao gave a small nod, voice steady. Take care of her, James. Don't make the mistakes I made. James reached for Diep's hand, their fingers intertwining. His words were firm, his tone resolute. I won't. She deserves happiness, and I'll spend my life making sure she has it. The sunset painted everything in amber hues as Pao stepped back, his chest heavy yet strangely free. The burden he had carried, the regret, the longing, seemed to lift at last. As he walked away, the sounds of the market swelling around him, he didn't feel defeated. He felt released. His lips curved into a faint smile, whispering a silent blessing. Be happy, Diep. Be happy, James. Behind him, the bicycle wheels rolled forward, carrying melons and memories alike, while ahead, Diep and James moved hand in hand toward a future unmarred by the shadows of the past. For the first time in years, Pao no longer feared what lay ahead. Instead, he carried with him a quiet hope, fragile but real, that even broken roads could lead to something new. The evening breeze rustled softly through the narrow streets, carrying with it the sense of grilled food and distant laughter. The marketplace had quieted, vendors slowly packing away their goods, the once bustling road now glowing under lantern light. James walked with purpose, his steps measured, his thoughts heavy. The image of Diep and Pao together, though innocent, still echoed in his mind. He needed clarity, not just for himself, but for Diep too. He found Pao sitting on a worn wooden bench outside a small convenience shop. The man looked tired, his bicycle leaning against the wall, the faint glow of the street lamp casting deep shadows on his face. James approached, his expression calm yet resolute. "Pao," he said firmly, his voice breaking the silence. Pao lifted his head, surprised but not startled. His lips curved into a faint, tired smile. "James, I thought you might come." James didn't sit right away. He studied Pao, searching for the man who had once made Diep suffer. He wanted to understand if this was truly someone new, or just echoes of the old mistakes. Finally, he sat beside him, their shoulders separated by an unspoken wall. "You've been around deep again," James began, his tone steady. "I know today was by chance, but I need you to hear me clearly." His eyes sharpened. "She's been through enough. You were part of her pain. I won't let that happen again." Pao lowered his gaze, his fingers tracing the edge of the bench. "I know," he admitted, his voice raw. "I know what I did to her, and I live with it every day." He paused, his throat tightening. "But James, I didn't mean to hurt her today. I only wanted to help. I saw her struggling, and I couldn't walk away." James leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice pressing like weight. "Intentions matter less than outcomes, pal. She deserves peace now, and that peace doesn't include you lingering in her life." For a moment, silence fell between them, broken only by the chirping of night crickets. Pao took a long breath, his eyes distant, as if replaying years of mistakes in the span of seconds. "You're right," Pao finally said, his voice softer, steadier. "I failed her. I was a terrible husband, and for years, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could ask her to forgive me, to let me try again. But when I saw her smile with you, I realized something. She's already where she belongs." James's jaw tightened, his gaze unmoving. "I wanted to ask her to come back," Pao confessed, his words trembling. "But she refused. She's stronger now, stronger than me, and she deserves the kind of love I never gave." His voice broke for a moment before he steadied it again. "That's why I won't bother her anymore." James's features softened slightly, though his tone remained firm. "If you mean that, then you'll stay away. Let her live her life without the shadows of the past following her." Pao nodded slowly, the acceptance sinking deep into his bones. "I will. I promise." The two men sat in silence, side by side, neither looking at the other. And yet, in that quiet, something shifted. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it was no longer hostility. Days later, the cafe under the wide old tree once again sheltered Diep, James, and unexpectedly, Pao. He had asked for one last meeting, Not to plead, not to linger, but to bring closure. The air was warm, the scent of lemon tea mingling with the fading daylight. Diep sat calmly across from him, James beside her, his hand lightly resting on hers. "I asked to see you both," Pao began, his voice measured, carrying neither desperation nor bitterness. "Because I need to say this where it matters most." He looked at Diep, his eyes steady, no longer weighed down by shame. "Diep, I thought I wanted us to start over, but I was wrong. You've given me forgiveness, and that is more than I deserve. I won't ask for more." Diep's expression softened, her voice quiet but warm. "Pao, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means we both move forward without carrying anger." He nodded, her words like balm on a wound that had long festered. Then he turned to James. His throat tightened, but he forced the words through. "James, I see the way she looks at you. It's the way I always wish she would look at me. Protect that. Protect her. Don't ever take it for granted." James met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "I will. You have my word." For the first time, Pao smiled genuinely. It wasn't the smile of a man hoping to win something back, but of one who had finally let go. He extended his hand. "Then this is where I step back. Be happy, both of you." James hesitated only a moment before shaking his hand, firm and sure. Diep watched the gesture, her chest tightening with unexpected relief. The air around them felt lighter, as though years of bitterness had finally lifted. When the meeting ended, Pao walked away down the familiar red dirt road, his bicycle rolling beside him. The sunset painted the horizon in hues of orange and gold, stretching long shadows across his path. Yet his steps were light, his heart unburdened. For the first time, he wasn't walking away in defeat. He was walking toward change. He thought of Dieu, the girl he had mentioned once with hesitation. Perhaps there was still a chance to start again, not with Diep, but with someone who might walk beside him in this new chapter. He no longer feared the future. Behind him, at the cafe, Diep leaned gently against James's shoulder, their hands intertwined. She watched Pao's figure grow smaller against the horizon until he disappeared entirely, swallowed by the dusk. Her heart carried no bitterness, only gratitude for the closure, for the courage to forgive, and for the love that now remained beside her. James pressed a kiss to her temple, whispering softly, "He's gone. It's just us now." Diep closed her eyes, letting the words sink in like the warmth of the fading sun. "Yes," she murmured, "just us." The lanterns flickered to life one by one along the road, illuminating their faces in a gentle glow. The past had loosened its grip, and the night ahead promised a new beginning, fragile but full of hope. And somewhere in the distance, Pao whispered into the wind. His words carried softly into the night. "Be happy, Diep. Be happy, James." The world seemed to pause in quiet agreement, as if the stars themselves bore witness to an ending that was, in truth, a beginning. That was the closing of their story. Not with anger, not with resentment, but with forgiveness, acceptance, and the courage to step into futures untethered by the past.